Alright, so week 2 we're going to talk about collection and sampling. I'll quickly go through this. Introduction to data, how we gather it, different types, what fusion means, and then some odds and ends on this. The importance of data is that you got to understand data is the foundation of everything. Everything in our environment, all of our decisions can be based on data. Even your gut calls, your intuition, all that is just methods of understanding the data that's coming in around you that you're sensing from the world around you. Data becomes, when organized correctly, can become information. It can be useful. That useful information then can be shaped and understood and become intelligence. That intelligence then is going to feed our analysis for our end users, and that's what we're really going for. So it means to gather data. How do you get this data? There's a couple of main ways. There's active, you're taking an active role in going out and pursuing this information, gathering it from people. Then there's passive, a lot of ways that we can just put systems out there that collect or go into other systems that have already collected and get information. So actively, think about surveys and interviews, and you can kind of read this later, but, surveys and interviews, what you're trying to do here is you're going to get very structured information, right? So if you have the ability to go and get that structured information, lay it out, lay out exactly what you need ahead of time. Make sure it's well constructed, you got a good sample size, make sure you've got data that is different enough in there that you can actually make decisions off what you're gathering. Passive collection, you're kind of at the mercy of what you're going to get from the systems, but there's a lot of big examples here. So video surveillance, obviously this is widespread. You're going to capture a lot of stuff here. Activity monitoring, audio surveillance, obviously a lot of recent information about that. Locations, keys into other databases for systems that have been collecting, customer databases on the business side. Those are the kinds of things that you can actually reach into. So what do you do with all this? Well, let's use a very simple sort of restaurant example. Most good restaurants are going to have a customer management system of some sort. When you make a reservation there, they're going to know a few things about you. They're going to know your phone number, right? It's going to have a zip code, so they'll know kind of where you live. They'll know whether you show up in the past reliably. Do you make reservations and not show up? How often do you come? What kind of size of party? Demographics, size of your bill. And what they can do with all that information is basically, well, they can get just direct mail. They can kind of guide the server towards asking you for different things that you would probably be interested in that might upsell your bill. And if it's been a problem in the past, they can just not find your table. So those are things that, you may not even realize, but just by giving your phone number and having a record there at the restaurant, these are things that can be done. Other commercial programs do that as well, right? Frequent flyer miles, they do the same kind of thing. Where do you like to fly? Hotel guests, tracking your stay, making the room the way you want it. Car rentals, picking out cars for you. And Amazon's obviously great at this. Any online retailer, if you go and visit their site, all of a sudden these ads are going to pop up wherever you go in social media to follow you. That's all intelligence from a business perspective. So how do we use it for security? Well, we're looking at the same kind of thing, but think about all that data and then add into it facial recognition, for known subjects. So with all that video data, we can use facial recognition now to track people. Financial activity patterns. So you're making these sales and everything. We're not so interested in what you might be buying next, but maybe we're interested in the pattern of how you bought things, because that tells us a lot about what you might be interested in and what you might be up to. Cyber activity, the same way with sites you go into. Associations that you might be having. Any combination of all those things can be built into an algorithm that tells us from a security intelligence standpoint something useful. Then there's the big collection methods that we'll call the intelligence groupings. And these are broken up into categories because it allows us to sort of break out the technologies and techniques associated with them. Now I won't get into in deep detail on each one of these, but go ahead and read through these charts yourselves. There's human intelligence. This is just human sources, right? I've been doing this for ages. Signals intelligence, communication intelligence with the subset of SIGINT, measurements intelligence, and then geographic intelligence. So starting at the bottom and going back, geospatial basically think about all the imagery from satellites and other collection mechanisms, photography and such. Tells you about the world underneath you, but not just pictures. That's important because you can do change detection on pictures and see who's doing what over time. But there's also thermal imagery, there's bathymetry for underwater. There's types of imagery, I tell you the soil's been disturbed, those kinds of things that tell us about the world around us and what people are doing there. SIGINT is basically anything that's electronic, so anything that's being communicated. You can tell what kinds of vehicles are being operated by the kinds of signals that are being sent out. If you can gather certain kinds of signals, they might be associated with a signature of a particular sensor or a radar or something like that. So signals intelligence is key for understanding the battlefield. Comment is a subset of that, where you get into, now let's break some of these signals down and see what they're actually talking about, and that's important. So if you know the organization function of the transmitter, you can learn the time and duration of the transmission. Is it periodic? If it's encrypted, we can do some decryption here, and a lot of comment is really about taking not just the fact that there's some platform out there sending us signals, but really breaking those signals down and understanding what they mean, and how we can potentially learn from each signal itself, not just the fact that it's being sent. Measurements intelligence, important for understanding a lot of platforms. So the big example is submarines and missiles, right? You want to learn about these kinds of systems. So we'll use things like hydrophones, sonar, MAD detectors, things that tell us about the environment and tell us about the system that's being operated. We can use telemetry to look at a weapon that's been fired to see how, what was the arc that it took. What does it tell us about how much energy it actually has, how much fuel it actually carries. We can learn a lot about that using those signals and measurement intelligence. Combine all this stuff into something like arms control, right? You have measurements intelligence that tell you about the capabilities that your opponent's developing. You have imagery that tells you about, where they're developing these sites that they're going to use them. Signals intelligence tells you what they're talking about in terms of how they actually control these things. And comment, which we don't have on here, but comment could tell you then, if we understand this, we might understand the intent, how they're going to use these things. So you have a lot of these different ints that get combined together. There's also cyber. So think about that, the fact that you've got all this opportunity out there within the internet to see what people are doing as well. All of these other sources are available now because of the big data techniques that you can utilize. So now we have the hardware to go across all the local journalism and see, well, what, from a search perspective, what do we know is going on? What patterns can we build from an environmental perspective, from a community perspective? What have we seen going on in these areas? There's an immense amount of information you can get from interest groups, blogs. If you have a security clearance, you know that they are very careful about telling everyone who has clearances not to use these systems or to talk about anything you do, because you can put a lot of good, smart intelligence together just by offhand comments here and there within social media. Business data too. What are they doing? What are they buying? You can pull that stuff out of different. If you have access to those databases, you can pull those out of the different companies that you might be buying things from. Again, they paint a pattern of what people are doing. There's some constitutional quirks to worry about. We have Title 10 and Title 50 in the U.S. Constitution. Title 10 basically refers to our armed forces. Title 50 is what we do for national defense, for intelligence operations and espionage. The two don't mix. So when you want to do something that's a mission to protect or for security or defense, you've got to figure out how you're gonna cross these two streams as it were. Sometimes it's rice bowls. Sometimes you got an issue because you'll get funded to do an imagery satellite in the Army that you'll be able to use tactically. Intelligence community will be funded to build an imagery satellite for NGA as well. They're going to use that for intelligence. They may be the same satellite, or they may be covering the same ground, but maybe they don't. It'd be great if we could use both of these and kind of share the data back and forth. But that can get tricky sometimes, and so that's how we work through some of those issues is another one of the sort of the quirks that we got to deal with in the U.S. But assuming that we can get some of this stuff solved, what you want to understand then is how do we fuse this to create complete pictures. So here's a personalization standpoint. So perfectly above board, what do companies do to you? They look at your website visits, they look at your ad collects, credit card usage, your purchase data. Maybe if they're not completely above board, they're using malware, some things like that. But, what they're doing is develop a personalized picture. They understand you. They do intelligence on you, understand who you are. We do the same kind of fusion on the defense side and from an intelligence standpoint. We use GeoInt to tell us what happened at a location over time. SIGINT's going to lead us to a particular location. All sources, basically social and video, are going to identify activity. Some HUMINT might tell us if there's somebody of interest, right? Maybe we follow up, and the comment tells us what we're saying. So if you think about it, the GeoInt's an easy one. SIGINT probably is easy to do collection. If you're going to start targeting over the web using social and video, that's going to take a little bit of energy. If you've actually got human sources, that's expensive, and that's hard to come by. So, and then comment means you're specifically targeting an individual, and now we're going to find out what's going on there. So there's all kinds of ways to kind of flow through these different intelligence gathering methods based on where you're at in a certain investigation, or where you are in terms of what you're trying to accomplish from a defense standpoint. Fusion to a target from a battlefield perspective. Comment identifies a person. IMINT is going to identify their location. SIGINT can triangulate based on their cell phone or whatever they've got. An insider threat in security. Comment can identify your threat vector. So from big data sources, you can see, hey, we've got some patterns here that seem to look like insider threat activity. HUMINT, other coworkers can tell you what's going on, and then your video itself can capture activity as it occurs. And then big data, anything that we've got from big data, that all source intelligence is huge. And that's an emerging area of techniques here. So monitoring communications, social media, open source activity, traffic patterns, and applying heuristics that basically look across those patterns to tell us what we're trying to see. Are we seeing more activity in certain areas? Are we seeing certain companies from a defense standpoint that might be investing in different things? From an insider threat perspective, pure security, do we see a behavior that we should be worried about? There are challenges with integrating all these data sources. So it's not just Title 10, Title 50, but even within that, these data source owners have different missions. And if the Army has a mission for its satellite, it's going to use it for that mission. And it's going to be really hard to redirect that if you got something that's of interest to you. So they make you be consistently out-prioritized. Classified capabilities, a lot of times, they may be a great way to find a source, but you don't even know it exists. Some intel capabilities aren't publicly known. Think about the story we talk about with President Clinton's missile attack on Osama bin Laden. Basically alerted everyone that we could track cell phones. So we lost that sort of ability to capture people because they stopped using them. Protecting sources, a lot of times you're using intelligence, and using intelligence will out a source. Just by the nature you have it, they know who it was that gave it to you. There's only a certain number of people that ever go into this room. So if you have a picture of that room, they know kind of who that was. Those are the kinds of things you need to work through. And then, from data cleansing perspective, it's real important to say that, if you get garbage in, you get garbage out. So don't assume that the data that you're getting is correct. Vocation, description, vocabularies change over time. Heuristics can be used to fix some data sets, but you got to be very deliberate about it. We get a lot of be very distrustful of any sources that are like maintenance records or things that have to be collected, because if it has to be entered in, people are going to just do it if they don't understand the consequences of what they're doing if they make mistakes. So, you got to make sure you got good data. In summary, given whatever problem you've been asked, what sources are going to give you the best information to be able to do the analysis that you need? Decide the sources that you need and invest in the collection from those sources, and in order to get the information that'll give you the analysis that you need.